Your ears do not deceive you. You have just entered the Cryptid Creator Corner brought to you by your friends at Comic Book Yeti. So without further ado, let's get on to the interview.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Cryptid Creator Corner. I'm Byron O'Neill, your host for today's Comics Creator Chat. And this was kind of the most happenstance pathway to setting up an interview I do believe I've ever had. My guest, Jonathan Marks Barravecchia, is the artist working on an exciting new Image Comics series, Bear Pirate Viking Queen, sorry about that, with writer Sean Lewis. So kind of the story here is I saw a variant cover in the hardcover for Last Ronin. On my read through, it caught my eye. It's Michelangelo kneeling with his head bowed, holding a sword in a fall forest scene with like a big foo dog statue. And for some reason, it popped in my head that I should go back and see who this artist was and if they had a print of it available. I think I was moving around my trade paperback shelf where I have like foo dog bookends, and I think that triggered it. But anyway, I find my way to Jonathan's website. Sure enough, there's a print, but there's more to the image than is printed in the Last Ronin book. There's a baby foo dog, so I knew I had to have it. So I ordered a print and I was poking around to see what other stuff this incredibly talented person was doing. Turns out he had an Image Comics project soon to be released, and I knew I wanted to talk to him about it. So here we are. Jonathan, welcome to the show. How's things?
Hell yeah. Thanks so much for having me. It's good. Everything's good. Thanks, Byron.
Yeah. So I promised Jonathan a surprise. He has no idea where this is going, by the way. So hopefully this won't completely tank. But maybe you can help me solve a dilemma. So I was poking around your website and I came across a tribute piece from the classic Frank Miller Wolverine cover, where he's like covered up fighting a bunch of ninjas. Does this piece ring a bell?
It does. I know. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Okay, so tell me about it. What inspired you to do that piece? Or
So that's a piece for. So we were talking before we recorded. I'm in New York, and there's a gallery I work with in Chelsea called the Philippe Lebon Gallery. It specializes in narrative art, comic book, and illustrators from Europe and the U.S. mostly.
Yeah.
And so that was a piece I did for a show at Philippe's. That was a group show with a lot of the artists he represents, and it was I think I did one or two pieces, and that was my Frank Miller tribute. I love the image, like it's one of the earlier comic books that I have, or one of the earlier trades that I have, is that Frank Miller covered in ninjas Wolverine, and so I wanted to just sort of pay homage and show my interpretation of that.
Very cool. Well, here's my surprise. So
Yeah.
listeners will have to bear with me for just a moment. But okay, so what I'm holding up.
What?
Right. So I'm trying to get it out. Yeah, so you can see it, but what I'm showing off is a 24 by 36 original poster from 1987 that hung on my wall as a kid. Yeah, so it's the same cover. Bit of a backstory here. So we recently moved close to my parents, and they've been cleaning out the attic and bringing us stuff over from Tennessee to North Carolina when they visit, which includes all of my old comics and posters from the area when I worked in 3 different comic book shops. And there are way too many of them for me to hang, and my wife wants it contained to one room. Right. So I got to be choosy. So I took a bunch of them over to Acme Comics in Greensboro, told my friend Jermaine, who is also known as Lord Retail, that I didn't want money for them. I just wanted to find them good homes. So, short story long here. Some of them I've already given to comics creators I know, but this one I've held onto until it seemed like fate would intervene. So if you're interested, it's yours.
I would love it. Thank you so much. That's amazing.
Yeah, 100%.
Oh, hell yeah. Oh, man, my wife is going to be thrilled.
I doubt that.
No, I'm kidding. That's so cool. Thank you so much. That's amazing.
Yeah, problem. Well, first off, getting to the actual book we're trying to cover here. I loved it. I was sharing on the Comic Book Yeti Editors Discord yesterday that your work here is absolutely the best visual presentation I've seen in the medium in 2024. And I have no idea how you haven't been working on more major projects at this point. So I want to start with your kind of comics journey as an artist. So how did all this start?
So the very start, like the very beginning, was short or long story short, grew up reading comics and loved comics. When I was in high school, had an opportunity to make a comic for my senior project. My high school, for the last couple of weeks had this option where you could, get an internship, do a project with a in the field that you wanted to study or something like that. So I pitched a comic book. Basically, it was hard. I was 17 or 18, and it was so much harder than I thought it was going to be. I teamed up with a writer. One of the teachers was a comic book fan. He'd written this fantasy story back in the day. So we made it into like a, I don't know, 12-page comic. And it was so difficult and so discouraging that I finished the project. It's terrible. My mom has a bunch of them. It's just like swipes from Joe Mad and Andy and Adam Kubert and like whoever I was reading.
Yeah.
And I basically, like, after that, I was like, okay, I can't do this. This is too hard. I don't want to lose the love I have for art. I don't want to lose the love I have for comic books. I can't do this as a career. So I stepped away from it for not that long. I studied literature and history in college, and kind of started reading comics again and started falling in love with them again, and always kept a sketchbook. And eventually, as I got a little bit older, still in college, I realized that need to make art of some form or another, visual art. So kind of just dabbled in a bunch of different things, and eventually recognized that I needed to focus on, for me personally at least, focus on one sort of discipline, and then from that maybe move forward or branch out to do. This was I was still young. I was like, oh, I want to like design sneakers, and I want to tattoo, and I want to draw comics, and I want to work in galleries, and I want to blah 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 blah.
Yep.
And you can't. Well, I can't do all of those things. Do one thing well enough that other doors open. So basically, like, fast forward, I don't know how many years, committed to comic books, made my my submission packet, and was convinced that, like, well, whoever I send it to is definitely going to give me work. And so, like, who should I send it to first? And obviously sent it to everybody, and nobody gave me work because it was terrible. So, you start doing cons and working, improving. This is what I always tell young artists, for me at least, was, go to the cons, speak to the editors and the artists that you admire, show them your work, get the critiques, and then find them again in 6 months or in a year and show them the work again and again and again.
Yeah.
So eventually I did that for a number of years. I started working with Aspen Comics. I was living in California at the time. I was living in LA. So those dudes are out there. Started doing some work with Aspen, and then from Aspen started doing work with Marvel, and was actually under contract with Marvel for a couple years. I did the Dark Tower, 2 minis in the Dark Tower universe, the Lady of Shadows and Bitter Medicine, and then some singles and one shots. I did some Wolverine stuff, some Doctor Strange stuff. But at that time, I was painting more and sort of exploring more multimedia stuff in my comic books, in my narrative storytelling. And the Marvel editorial was great. They were very honest with me, like, hey man, this is tough to place. Like, we're having a hard time finding you work, and suggested edits and stylistic changes that I could make to be a little to make my life a little easier to be working in mainstream comics. And I basically said, I do appreciate that. This is the kind of work that I want to make, so I'm going to continue down this road. And so started doing more independent books and a lot more cover work. But it's the mainstream comic book market is a funny thing. I think I grew up with both the 90s Image and Joe Mad, like I said, X-Men books that I genuinely loved, and sort of the Vertigo stuff and the Dave McKean and George Pratt's Wolverine and these painted sort of I don't want to say more artistic, but painterly books.
Yeah.
Were a big influence too. So in my mind, comic books can be either or, can be anything.
Yeah.
And it's just about finding the right stories and the right audience, frankly, to tell those stories, or the right audience who appreciates those kinds of stories, that kind of art.
So along your journey there, was watercolor sort of always a component of your style, or?
I started working in watercolor. No, is the short answer is no.
Okay.
I started working in watercolor because it seemed, I always liked working in black and white, and from black and white to black ink wash made sense, and then ink wash to a water-based pigment, watercolor made sense. Um, so I don't know. It was just sort of a progression, one thing after another. I mean, like I said, I didn't study art, so I didn't necessarily know what I was getting myself into,
Sure.
um, except for, high school art classes and stuff. But no, I don't know. I like sort of the flow, like the literal flow of the medium. So I always enjoyed working with it, but I don't know what sparked it.
Well, let's kind of dive directly into Bear Pirate Viking Queen. My take on this is it's all about, man's conquest drive.
Mhm.
So how did you get involved with the project with Sean?
So Sean, there's a funny story. Sean and I are neighbors.
Oh, okay.
We didn't know any of this. So I guess it was last year. Sean was doing a book at Image called Above Snakes. It was a cowboy
Yeah.
sort of surrealist western.
Yeah.
And I picked it up on a shelf, and I was, oh, this is cool. I did a little sketch cover, and I posted it on Instagram, and I tagged him in it, or I messaged him, or he messaged me, or something, whatever. We started talking on Instagram. Should do something together, yeah, and blah 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 blah. And one of us, like, or I asked him, I said, "Yo, are you in New York? I live in New York. Uh, do you? I said this before. I'm like, there's a 50% chance that he lives in New York, and a 50% chance he lives anywhere else in the world. So, like, yeah, what? He's like, I do live in New York, but I don't live in the city. We live like upstate, like about an hour. And my wife and I had just moved out of Brooklyn, like as I was messaging Sean. I was like, oh no
Wow.
way, like I just moved out of the city too. We live up in the Hudson Valley. He's like, I live in the Hudson Valley. So I live in this town called Beacon. I was like, no way, we just moved to this town called Beacon. He's like, oh, not really. Like I live in a small town next to Beacon that no one's heard of. And I said, I live in that, and he named the town. I said, I live in that same small town. So basically, we're like, he's walked to my house before. We live like a mile away from each other.
That is
So
wild.
it's crazy. So at that point, it was really like, well, let's just meet up and like see if we even get along, and then
Yeah,
like
sure.
if we can have like a working relationship, then even better. So yeah, met up for drinks, and we just sort of shooting the shit, like talking comics, talking life, and eventually like talking about the kind of books that we would want to make. And it really was like just listing. I mean, I had a sketchbook with me that he was flipping through, and he's like, "Oh, I like this, or like, what do you like to draw?" And Sean's great. He's uh, not uniquely, but the best writers, I think, within the comic book space or within collaborative spaces are willing to have that conversation with the artist or with their collaborator. Like, what do you want? What do you like to draw? What do you get excited about? And that was Shawnee was, what do you want to work on? Because he's like, we can figure out a story about anything. And man, it was just like literally listing nonsense, just listing things like, dinosaurs, pirates. I like, I always like drawing animals, um, samurai, uh, you know, really grounded, like detective noir. Like, I mean, I'm just literally now, I'm just like, it was just that listing a bunch of stuff. And I think eventually we got to a list of Bear Pirate Viking Queen. And jokingly, we're like, that's a book. Like, imagine if we just called it that. And I think we both sort of like the light bulb went off, like, yeah, imagine, like, what would that even be? So Sean really just sort of went off on his. So we sort of decided, like, let's see what that actually is. Sean went off on his own for a week or two, and figured out sort of the bones of a story, and basically brought me a poem, and was like, I think this is something here. And it's certainly not like a comic book script in the traditional sense. It was sort of a poem meets outline meets I don't even know what, but like these are the beats. I think this is what we want to the story we want to tell is somewhere in here.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, this is great, man. That initial document, which was like 2 or 3 pages, I was like, I think this alone is like a 50-page comic book. So like meet up again and break it down and what happens here and here and here. So like thematically, you're absolutely right. Like it turned into sort of an exploration of like empire and conquest and man's sort of desires for control and for power and what that brings.
Mhm.
But that's like the lofty bullshit. Like the other stuff is like, man,
Right.
it's about a pirate and it's a Viking, it's action story, it's on the water, it's got a bear in it, like it's just fun stuff. So
Well, for those who haven't seen your work yet, I want people to picture kind of a mixture, and I hate doing this, but we got to give landmarks, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Kind of a mixture between, Jason Sean Alexander and Bill Sienkiewicz, like
Sure.
somewhere in there. I think, Sienkiewicz, especially if you draw a parallel between enjoying drawing bears, is
You
something
can't,
he's
yeah.
known for.
I
Yeah, it is. It's a very visceral presentation, kind of
mm,
which fits the tone of this dark tale perfectly, like fluctuating between portrait realism and embracing those abstraction watercolor bleeds, which provide at least a scaffolding for some of this like bare pencil work that you're doing. Um, and I'm educating myself on kind of how to write comics now. I'm
mm,
just trying to do scripting. So, and I come from more of an artistic background, which feels very difficult mentally to make that leap because I want to construct the visuals all the time in my head, right? But
yeah.
I don't want to be that guy handing over an overly nuanced or detailed script, which just basically tells the artist what to do, right? So it sounds like Sean, from the jump, you were very, very involved in this collaborative process, and you guys created this much more together than
Yes.
something where the artist is, let's say, from South America, right? Like you guys are just down the road. So
Yeah, and that was like invaluable. I mean, yeah, it was definitely a collaboration and us breaking the story together. And like to your point too, at no point was I given very strict guidelines or uh I mean even specifics. This makes I don't know. It makes my life as the artist harder, but it was something that I wanted and embraced. And frankly, for Sean as the writer, like it takes a tremendous amount of trust for him to be like, this is the idea of like, hey, these next 3 pages, let's have the pirates, sail into the sunset and then, crash into an island, and then leave it up to me to figure out exactly how to do that. Is take some trust.
yeah, yeah, for sure. What part of the script was kind of hardest for you to conceptualize, or did you just have kind of free reign to, okay, I want to take it like this?
Yes and no. There were some parts where, especially at the beginning, where we had sort of a very broad outline of where we wanted to go. And this is entirely on me. I got ahead of myself once or twice with like, this is gonna happen and this is gonna happen, blah, 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 blah. So I'm gonna take the story in a certain direction visually
Hmm.
that when we then met up again, Sean and I didn't make sense. And so some of those pages are just scrapped pages. Like
Sure.
it's not, this sounds dramatic. It's not a big deal, but yeah, once or twice it was like, well, this, you wanted, Jonathan, you wanted to I don't want to give anything away. Let's say like even something as simple as like these, you have a page here where the protagonist's scared of something,
Hmm.
and really for the story to hit better, he needs to be like aggressive towards that something. So, that's just again me taking it on myself to be like, oh, I want to do this thing, but it doesn't fit the story. And so then we like go back and make sure that we're both on the same page. But again, like working in that kind of collaborative space I never felt like um anything was being forced or like I was having to figure anything out that I frankly that I didn't want to figure out on my own anyway.
Okay. Yeah, there are a few moments in here which feel contemplative, like in the
Mm,
first issue. So there's like a panel with lightning, two full consecutive pages of stormy seas with a sky and very little else. My personal favorite
hmm.
panel with a shark that's rendered in
Oh
red.
yeah.
Yeah, or it looks like a kind of an homage to the famous Great Wave of Kanagawa, like the Japanese
Mm,
woodblock print.
Nice. Thank you.
None of these are particularly detailed, and they're like these primal pause buttons that let the story breathe a little bit
Yes.
between kind of the furious action sequences. So I'm really wanted to kind of dive into process is something I
Yeah.
love talking to artists about. So how did you put together your layouts? Because there's that dichotomy, especially between those high detailed action sequences and these very visually fluid moments that aren't
Mm,
as detailed.
thank you. Yeah, I mean, again, like because the script was so sparse, was so unlike a script, that pacing was entirely up to me.
Okay.
And because it was an image book, or is an image book, and we don't have like the page limitations that other publishers do, we can make the book as long or short as we want. So having that sort of breathing space was very important to me. And so it just I laid everything out pretty much in one, or not one go, but like all together. Like, so I had the thumbnails for the first issue. I mean, you've read it, it's like 70 pages.
Yeah.
So I had almost all those except for the ones where I got too far ahead of myself. Then I pulled back. I have almost all those together. So I know that, like, to your point, if we have a big action sequence, I want to slow the reader down. This is one of the greatest things about comic books, that the creative team is not in charge of, but can influence the pace with which you consume the story.
Hmm.
And you can do that through like a million different ways. But like for me as the visual storyteller, like slowing you down, like you said, like now it's just a 2-page spread of clouds, which some people might just like, oh, there's nothing to read here, and flip through it. And some people might like sit in it for a moment. That's entirely up to the reader. But my intention is for you to like pause and like be in that storm with the character for those 2 pages or 3 pages or whatever it is. So again, I mean, I was very lucky that that the working relationship between Sean and I allowed for that.
Yeah, I mean, what really blew me away more than anything else was the panel diversity
Mm,
because it's bold.
thank you.
You are definitely playing with shapes. I mean, more than even so, it's very in style. With the big two, like I'm thinking Batman or something like
Yeah.
that, where they get really pretty creative with layouts. But this, you're doing all kinds of crazy stuff. So talk to me about how you're wanting to take a reader, from point A to point B, and how you're doing layouts and how you
Mhm.
set this up on the page.
Um, I don't know. I mean, at this point, it's almost intuitive. I have a lot of influences from within comic books from, you know, American and European and Japanese artists.
Hmm.
So I think that that's influenced some of my storytelling, uh, like architecture in moving the eye around the page. Like I said, I mean, I did grow up with some of those image books where it was the like that big anchor panel or that big, figure, and then breaking the borders and then doing all this nonsense. So that's in there somewhere. Uh, but I think that I want to only use those tricks when it's absolutely necessary, and when it's in service to like moving around the page.
Okay.
And frankly too, honestly, I heard, I think Brian Boland in an interview was talking about this too, where like our job as illustrators, or as specifically as comic book illustrators, is to tell the story, and the art itself is kind of a secondary thing. But for me, and Brian was saying this too, Brian, Mr. Boland was saying this. Was like we love the art. Like it's very important to me and to my fragile little ego that like this bear looks cool as shit. So I want, as that panel has to look perfect.
Yeah.
And then, because it's a comic book, not only that, but it has to pull you into that next panel, which also has to look perfect, which has to pull you across into.
Yeah.
So it's like a juggling act. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but
No, it does, because I'm just always interested in getting into the mind of how people conceptualize this, because I'm coming from like a fine art photography background.
yeah,
So I don't tell, I mean, you do in terms of a series of images that you're putting
yeah,
together. In terms of sequential, they need to have a thematic thread, that combines them all, but not like this, right?
right,
So I'm just interested in how people, put that stuff together.
yeah,
And you're getting away with so much. There was like one full page scene with a boat where it's almost entirely black. The masthead bisects the page,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Which definitely breaks with like these traditional composition rules, but it worked, right? You pulled it off. So it was moments like that that I was
Yeah,
just like,
thanks.
damn, man, he's really pushing the envelope here.
Oh,
So
good. Thank you. I'm glad that some of them work.
that one really jumped out to me. I was
Oh
like,
yeah, good.
wow, okay, so I'm trying to do this. No, there's information on the other side. I'm getting it. I'm getting it. It doesn't bother me at all that there's just black swath
Good.
that
Hell yeah.
bisects it. Well, it's almost like a panel break anyway.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's you talked about photography. I mean, like the composition of the image, of the single image, especially on like a splash or a double page spread, is super important to me. It's definitely something that I'm thinking about. And as much as I love traditional comic book art, I do want to uh, I sound like an asshole, like challenge what that can be sometimes,
No, you got to.
you
I
know?
mean, that's what pushes you.
Yeah,
Push you
exactly.
better.
And again, my influences, like you said, Sienkiewicz is definitely one. Jason's another one. But Dave McKean and George Pratt and Kent Williams, Muth, like these were
You're
the
talking
big
my
ones.
language. Yes,
Yeah,
Muth,
these were the
Muth.
big
Yes.
ones who were like, okay, we can do this whole thing as well. It was very
Yeah,
cool, very like eye-opening for me.
yeah. Muth is like so underrated. Like one of my
Yeah,
all-time
yeah,
favorites,
yeah, yeah.
and just didn't do enough stuff. But
No, I know. He's got kids' books now that I'm always trying to scoop up. I can't remember the latest one. It's like an astronaut something. It's cool. It's like a little bit more kid friendly, but beautiful still.
oh, well, whoever the editor is on the book, God bless him for leaving in that like white negative space that you're utilizing, because that's a heavenly visual right there, right?
No editors. We were doing it's just Sean and I. So I'm
Really?
glad. So thank you. I'm glad that it works. Yeah.
Okay, I hope editors see this, sells really well, and that more
Yes.
people do this, because it's so good to use
Thank
negative
you.
space like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you have these distinct linear archetype phases as well to deal with. Kind of the bear operates off of instinct. The pirate is beholden to no code other than freedom. The Viking is savage but existing in a more rigid societal and religious structure. And the queen, which I don't quite know yet, but I'm imagining representing kind of that ruthlessness, but nonetheless a civilized character.
Hmm.
So how did you go about kind of wanting to portray each? Because they almost function like phases, if you will.
Hmm.
Because there's not a, I guess, a, I don't want to give too much away, but
Hmm.
there's not a singular distinct protagonist. Let's put it that
Yes.
way.
I also don't want to give too much away as the series, as the mini series goes forward.
Sure.
Um, so yes, to everything that you said.
Okay.
Uh, uh, we so I'll say this, which will kind of answer the question. It's a 3-issue mini, and we wanted each issue to sort of stand alone as well as contribute to a larger narrative. And within each issue, to sort of examine those archetypes. Like you're absolutely right that we were sort of playing into to examine them as archetypes and then to examine like what that means and how we can sort of challenge that.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean, you've read the first issue, you know
Yep.
how the first issue ends.
Hmm.
The second issue picks up right after that, but follows a different path.
Sure.
And then the third issue, again, sort of takes the reader, hopefully in a surprising and enjoyable direction. Sean and I wanted, as longtime fans of comics, wanted to make sure that at no point, or in as few times as we can, that the story was predictable. That now this next thing is going to happen. That the disenfranchised English sailor is going to turn into a pirate, and then we see that happen, and then the pirate, challenges the king pirate, and then he wins, and then that happens, and then, it's predictable, it's fun,
Mhm.
but we wanted to sort of challenge that both in the characters themselves and then in the storytelling.
Okay.
So,
Well, maybe we can get into the form language then, right? So
mm,
you've got those four. You also have the pirates. I know a fair number of comic artists use pictures as guides. So do you
mm,
use reference photos at all, or
I
how do
do,
you?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I
Okay.
shoot all my reference, and then find stuff on online, reference for old ships and fashion and
Okay.
whatever it's called, like the weaponry and it's not, I'll be honest, it's not exhaustively researched. If you are a scholar of 17th century, or I guess it would be 16th century, like weaponry, it's probably not accurate. But like, this looks cool and it's old and
Right.
whatever.
Yeah.
But I do use a lot of photography. I do shoot mostly myself, frankly. And my camera and my phone, I've just a bunch of pictures of me looking like growling like a pirate, or standing like a Viking, or whatever, or occasionally my wife if I can bully her into it, or friends. But yeah, I like, when I was younger, I didn't I was embarrassed to admit that I used reference. I felt like, especially as a comic book artist, like I need to be able to like come off the dome, man. Like, what does Spider-Man look like when he's swinging between two buildings upside down and flipping back and forth? Like, I need to know anatomy so well that I can do that quick off the top of my head. And you should, honestly, like, especially if you're doing superheroes, or especially if you're doing Spider-Man, you have to know anatomy back to front. But I found with the kind of work that I do too, I like having the reference in front of me so that I can pick and choose what I use from it.
Mhm.
So I can
Yeah.
spend less time sketching my layouts. Once I figured out the thumbnails for the full page, my pencils are really, I mean, I use a little red pencil, and it's really just kind of, an egg for the head, and then the stick figure body with notes for the elbows or for the hands or for the feet or whatever it is. And then I go straight into it with ink. And I can do that because I have the reference to one side of me. So I have something to like visualize. And then I can go into the ink and sort of just have that immediacy of the line when I pull it, instead of trying to sketch and find the right line and find the shift here or there. Just go right into it. And I think it just makes for a more interesting and honest uh, look.
It certainly does. I'm very glad I'm a photographer too, because like that, I
Mm.
can't imagine doing it that way, especially if I'm putting down, ink washes and stuff on a paper. To be scared, I'd fuck everything up all the time. And
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I'm working on a new cover, the cover for the trade right now on my desk, and it's got so far only one patch. So I do everything traditionally, and there's one like chunk that's just a different piece of paper that's glued on top of the board where I fucked it up already. So,
yeah,
yeah,
it
happens.
happens.
Yeah,
So you're lettering the project as well. So is this your first time
yes,
lettering as well?
it is. Yeah, 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 yeah. Figured it out for this, like taught myself and did a couple little projects with friends to make sure that I was confident and comfortable with it. But the lettering is all digital, so that does give me a little bit of wiggle room. A lot of the, sorry, fixing my light. Um, a lot of the sound effects are on the boards, but all the dialogue is digitally done in Procreate.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
thinking that some of those fonts were hand drawn. So
Yeah, 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 yeah. All the fonts are hand drawn.
okay,
So I designed the fonts themselves, yeah. But then I can letter the whole thing digitally.
okay. Well, what kind of projects are you most interested in, let's say, next, right? Like what is enamoring you lately?
There's a couple projects that I'm working on now that I'm very excited for that I can't talk about.
I'm used to that.
But yeah, I know it sounds. I I was at a con a couple years ago where I was saying that to someone, and they were like, "Oh, that just means you're not working on anything." It's like, God damn it, man, that's so
No, no,
rude.
no, no, no. It means
But
these things take
but
years to get
it's
out.
unfortunately, yeah, like Sean and I have another project that we've got in with some editors, as a pitch document now. I've spoken with some other writers where I've got some pages in the works. I do book illustration as well. I've got uh, an illustrated edition of Mind Swap, and I can't remember the name of the author that's coming out this year. Um, anyway, um, but in the comic book space, yeah, I mean, I love doing this kind of thing. I love doing sort of the fantasy, surreal stuff. I like the adventure. I like, uh, honestly, after this book being so sort of free and broad. I like the idea of sort of doing something smaller for the
Okay,
next
sure.
book, which is
Yep.
one of the projects that actually Sean and I are talking about,
Okay.
is super grounded, like a detective story, something that's smaller in scope, limited in uh, visuals. As much as I love to, like, Bear Pirate is sort of me showing off or trying to show off.
It's unrestrained. Yeah.
It's yeah, unrestrained is a yes.
Yeah.
I think that I actually look forward to uh, one of the projects that's in the works that's like super grounded. Like I can't hide behind, well, this is a big, like, expressive watercolor wash. It's like, no, it's just like black and white. Like the
Yeah.
shadow is right or it's wrong.
Yep. Because you can always throw down more watercolor. I mean, you can. It doesn't always work, of course, but
No,
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Yeah, you can always add more.
Yep. Well, I'm going to get in the weeds about paper for just a sec because I'm always
Mm,
interested in, paper choices for watercolor artists. And I've experimented with quite a few different papers in my own work like that, like
mm,
100% rag, 50/50 rag pulp,
mm,
even mulberry. So,
mm.
what do you like to use? What do you typically use?
I started with I've got an Arches roll of a hot press. It's 153 pound,
Okay.
which only comes in these giant rolls. They don't do
Yeah.
it in books. So I do like that. It's a little bit pricey, to be honest. So I've experienced. There's a Holbein multimedia paper that I like, and then I've actually been really enjoying Stonehenge paper, which
Okay.
takes a wash pretty well. Um, and then I've also got some Strathmore Bristol and some, like, I'm trying to see it on my files over there. Um, uh, I think it's a Canson, just a drawing pad that's not particularly good paper, but like I like the way that the watercolor or that the pigment sits on it. It kind of pools on it. So you
Hmm.
have to wait. The same with the Bristol. Like you have to wait longer than with a traditional watercolor paper
Yeah.
because the pigment isn't absorbed as quickly. But it has like a cool, an interesting look to me.
Okay. So does it typically make a more saturated color that way then? Since it's pooling and it just takes longer to soak or
It can do it. I find traditional watercolorists would hate it because you get those halos a lot
gotcha.
easier. You will have, because the pigment will be dispersed basically around a bubble of water.
Hmm.
So you'll have the lightest area in the middle of your wash, and then surrounding it, you kind of have a darker area, and it gets lighter as it goes to the middle, which
Okay.
you can easily paint around or move that heavier area of water, or be more precise when you're putting the water down, or wet the paper before. There's a million things you can do.
Right.
But I like that look. Uh, Sometimes I want that very smooth wash. Sometimes I like the almost like segmented pieces of color. Almost like I like painting in oils as well. And I remember like, as an adult, I've been trying to take painting classes with artists who I like, who I know. And one of the artists who I love described painting with oils as putting down pieces of paint. Uh, and I think watercolor doesn't typically work that way, but with some of these papers, like where it does pool, you can kind of put down a little piece and then wait, let it soak in or move or do whatever it wants. Put something else down. Put something else down. It's
Wow.
all about patience, which I sometimes have and sometimes do not.
I'm still blown away that you can manage to do this on a singular piece of paper. Because I was talking to
Yeah.
Tyler Crook about this with the Lonesome Hunters, and he was breaking
Mm,
down how he goes about doing it, and it's much more panel by panel, and
yeah.
then he's constructing things on the page, kind of jigging things in. But okay, this explains why the reeds work the way they do in this, because it's just, I don't know, to try to describe it to somebody listening, it's just so much more fluid than you
Mm,
typically expect from most comic books.
yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I love the hell out of it. So, where can everybody find you online?
So I'm on Instagram at Jonathan Marks Art, and I have a website online, is jonathanmarksart.com. That's it, just the two.
Cool. We'll put them in the show notes. I think it should be clear to everybody that I like the book quite a bit. So listeners should get the pre-orders in because I selfishly want to see Jonathan get more work, but also
Please.
because this thing is kind of a visual feast. I mean, it really is. It's one of those things where you really got to take time to read it. So I really appreciated the pacing and really trying to slow people down because everybody, even comics journalist friends, my co-host Jimmy, we're all trying to slow down the reading process because it's just that tendency is to spend 7-8 seconds, especially on a splash page, and you're done. So don't do that here at all because there's so much to pull in and for your eyes to kind of feast on. It is poetic carnage. That is how I'm christening it.
Oh yeah, I like that.
If people are fans of like Game of Thrones or Black Sails, this is the book for you. So Bear, Pirate, Viking, Queen is in stores when exactly?
First issue is out May 1st. The FOC, the final order cutoff for your shops is April 8th.
Okay.
So do tell your shops, support your local shops, tell them to order it for you, get in your pull box before the 8th of April.
All right. Well, Jonathan, thanks so much for joining me on the show today and kind of indulging in my deeper artistic.
Of course, no, that's fun.
Good.
I love talking about this stuff.
Good. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Well, this is Byron O'Neill, and on behalf of all of us at Comic Book Yeti, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time. Take care, everybody.
Thank you for joining us today for this episode of the Cryptid Creator Corner. We also have a podcast of the same name that you can download wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for watching.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Cryptid Creator Corner, maybe you would enjoy our sister podcast, Into the Comics Cave. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.